Mr. Speaker, always good to see you. Great to see you at Mar-a-Lago last week, you and Ambassador Gingrich, right there at the head table, right in the mix of things.
It was pretty wild. I think in some ways, seeing some of the actors who were there, and it was a pretty exciting evening. We were sitting across from President Trump, so that's always kind of a remarkable moment. And we had a great time. We were there for 3 days for the American Foreign Policy Institute meetings, and then of course we were there for dinner with the president. He was very generous during his talk afterwards, so pretty hard to beat.
Yeah, nice place to have dinner. I got to sit next to Mark Lauder, which was, equally nice, but a little different of a dinner conversation. Let me ask you this: on a scale, if you were Professor Gingrich back in your old days and had to grade this transition, what grade would you give it so far?
Probably an A plus. The one thing that looked like a mistake was, in fact, I think, well thought out and worked pretty well. Gates is out of the Congress. He managed to increase the value of having the former Attorney General from Florida, Pam Bondi, become the Attorney General, and it made it easier for the Senate to decide that she was terrific. And to have, I think Pete Hegseth has got to weather the storm, but so far it looks to me like the sort of he said, she said stuff isn't dispositive in terms of stopping him from becoming Secretary of Defense. The rest have all been terrific. They're not always the person I would have picked, but a very solid team. In fact, I'm writing about it as kind of a cabinet, the first real cabinet of entrepreneurs since Franklin Roosevelt drove business people out of power and replaced them with bureaucrats and academics.
Yeah, I want to pick up on a few of the threads that you just mentioned one at a time. Let me start with Pam Bondi, and then I want to get to experience, and then I want to get to Pete Hegseth. So let's start with Pam Bondi. I know you commented about the number of, saw a great picture on your Instagram. You and Ambassador Gingrich both posted it, and you've updated it as Mark Cuban questioned whether or not Trump likes to surround himself with strong women. And you and Ambassador Gingrich both posted a picture and continue to show iterations of it as it gets stronger and stronger with people like Pam Bondi, Susie Wiles, Elise Stefanik, Tulsi Gabbard, Kristi Noem, Caroline Leavitt, Linda McMahon. I mean, it's such a dumb comment to make when you realize how silly it is on its face.
Well, Callista came up with that, and that was her newsletter article that I then reposted. But I'm trying to convince her that in about another 10 days, she can do a second edition and say, as I was saying, and have a whole new list of people, because it was really a stupid comment by Cuba. Trump has never worried about having strong women around him. And he, frankly, as you know, he often pays more attention to them than to equally strong men.
Yeah, well, especially Mrs. Trump. I mean, I've told people that, she is probably hands down the most influential person in his life when it comes to advice. And I would advise anybody heading back into a second Trump administration, when she puts her opinion on the table, listen very carefully to it.
That's right.
He between her and Ivanka, he's surrounded himself with strong women. But let's pull the next thread for a second. Pete Hegseth. With Gates gone, does he become the next target?
Well, I think they're going to be conflicted because Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Has sufficient views, particularly on things like fluoridation. And I think he's going to be actually a much bigger threat to the food manufacturers than he is to the pharmaceuticals. So we'll see how much resistance they can drum up. As I think you guys noticed the other morning on the 9 o'clock call, about 80% of Republicans favor him, and about 48% of Democrats favor him. So I suspect he'll be all right in the end.
When you mentioned big food, take me back to your days as a member of Congress. Like, is that something that they're going to start calling up their members of Congress and saying, "Hey guys, we contribute a lot of money to you. I know he wants to deal with these processed foods. I've contributed to your campaign. I need you to help fight"?
Yeah, my experience was it was never quite that blatant. It was, we're good friends, and we've golfed together, and my company does a lot of good things, and it's a household name. You don't really want to cripple us. It's more like that. The underlying notion of who supports who is there, but it's very seldom quite, or at least when I was there, wasn't nearly as blatant as you described it. It's not quite so much a quid pro quo as it is a fraternity. We all go to the Ag Open and we all hang out together. And like the people who have ice cream day at the every year, they're hoping you'll remember to love them fondly. And I think the challenge they've got is when you look at the number of additives in American food and say European food, it's staggering how big the difference is. And that's where I think Kennedy may actually make a difference, just in making noise and getting people to start saying, wait a second, why is this true? I mean, the pharmaceuticals are much more muscular. Part of their power is just the sheer volume of advertising they buy. I mean, what network wants to get in a head-on fight with all the big pharma and see them take away all their ads? But on the other hand, they're also they're permanently sort of behind the eight ball because people pay for it. People notice the prices, so people tend to be slightly more resentful of how much it costs than they are grateful that it exists. And I think that's a balance. But I mean, Robert Kennedy, in a normal environment, I think Kennedy would have a harder time. In this environment, the people who have decided they're for Trump, and then you can check me on this if you don't agree, they really believe Trump is the spearhead of fundamentally changing a system that frightens them and makes them very angry. And so they are not inclined. I mean, if they didn't back off during the arrests and during the photos and during the impeachments, and you can go down the list, they ain't going to back off because he picks Robert F. Kennedy Jr. or he picks Tulsi Gabbard. And I think Tulsi has a little more of a challenge. I like her very much personally. And she's got to be able to explain some of her foreign trips and whether or not she was making any money and whether or not she reported it. But if she can explain it, she'll get through. And candidly, my bias, and as you know, I've done this a long time, my bias is the system is so sick, so incestuous, so filled with waste and corruption that bringing in some genuine outsiders and having them for a little while run amok is probably good, because you need to break up the kind of insider deals that have really become an enormous, I think, weakness in the American system.
Well, that gets me back to the Hegseth question. The Washington media and the left loves to throw around the term qualification. So let's look at Pete Hegseth's qualification. 2 Bronze Stars, a tour in Gitmo, Afghanistan, Iraq, graduate of Princeton and Harvard. Sounds pretty qualified. He ran a VSO, a Veteran Service Organization, Concerned Veterans for America, but he's not from the defense industrial complex, right? And that's where I look at someone, I go, wait a second. So Pete Buttigieg, who was 37 at the time, mayor of South Bend, Indiana, with 66 buses, he's qualified to run the Department of Transportation. Dennis McDonough never served in the military, is qualified to run the VA, the Veterans Administration, never dealt with housing, lending, or healthcare, the 2 greatest services provided by the VA. And yet he's qualified. And suddenly now, but I think it's a dog whistle, right? That's what it's, to me, it's what you were just referring to. It's these guys are going to break up business as usual. And so we got to find a way of expressing that without really saying that we just don't like them.
Well, look, I mean, let's stick with the DOD for a minute. When Boeing gets away with charging 8,000% more for something to put in the C-17 than it cost, 8,000%, there's something profoundly wrong. When SpaceX can take a satellite to Jupiter for 10% of what Boeing was going to charge, there's something profoundly wrong. When Milley is wrong on everything, I mean, it is embarrassing how bad he was as chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He was wrong about Afghanistan. It was a fiasco the way we withdrew. People should have been, frankly, summarily dismissed from the service. He was wrong about Ukraine. He's the guy who said the Russians will be in Kyiv in 3 days. And so I don't necessarily want somebody who is a professional, quote unquote, in a system of defeat, failure, and corruption. I want somebody who's an outsider, who's going to ask common sense questions, and is going to force change. Now, I'm a little discouraged that Pete has, Princeton and Harvard. I mean, the degree to which we had Do we really always have to go to the Ivy League? But on the other hand, if you'd walked in and just listed his qualifications, very few people would have said that he's not qualified to do something pretty big.
Yeah, I just think this is a dog whistle, though. He's qualified, but they just don't. They don't want to say. I mean, they got through a ton of people who were clearly not qualified, but suddenly that's the new bar because he's not going to support the status quo.
Look, I mean, you had to deal with the press at a much more intimate level than I did, so you may have you may be more comfortable with them. Uh, I describe most of the press as the propaganda media.
Yeah.
They are the offensive arm of the Democratic Party. They have zero claim to being neutral. So if you say to me, they send in an idiot to do a job, and as long as he's a liberal Democrat, they all applaud. They send in a brilliant person to do a job, and if he's a Trump Republican, they attack him. I would say to you, yes, that tells you who they are. And I fully expect them to be hysterically one-sided. Maybe not quite as bad as the State Department providing crying rooms for diplomats who are so shaken by the Trump victory. I mean, you have to wonder, if you're a diplomat who has to have a crying room over a presidential election, should we really send you to Nigeria? I mean,
Or anywhere.
or anywhere. I mean, you're going to face a lot bigger problems in the world than an American presidential election.
So when Trump, we've spoken a lot on personnel. Let's talk policy for a second. When he gets in, there's some things that he has to do and some things that he wants to do. Walk us through what you think the first, month needs to look like in terms of what does he need to be doing policy wise, and what does he have to do?
Well, I mean, the opening day will be border, 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 and deport, deport, deport. I mean, it'll be a series of executive orders that profoundly, overnight, change our relationship with illegal immigrants. And he has to do that, and his base totally expects it. And he wants to do that, I think. I think next that he's going to deal with tariffs, and I thought you guys on the 9 o'clock call did a pretty good job of really trying to think through to what degree is he raising the tariff issue to start the negotiation, and to what degree is he raising it because he's actually going to do it. And I think people need to remember he's a very good negotiator. He wrote a book called The Art of the Deal, and an even better book called The Art of the Comeback. And he understands how to go into these are business, in his mind, these are business meetings. And he has the largest market in the world. Therefore, he has all the leverage. He can find other countries to buy from. You can't find other countries to sell to. And the damage he may do to the Chinese economy is staggering, because they're really right at they have two huge problems. One is demographic. The one-child policy is now really beginning to eliminate the workforce and reduce dramatically their population. And the other is that they set up this Ponzi scheme of raising money for local governments based on property, and the amount of debt they build up is just breathtaking. So if they get hit with any serious tariffs and their exports slow down dramatically, they have a huge problem, and Trump knows that, and he gives him a lot more leverage than people like Biden and Harris understood. I think he will move very early on a variety of conflicts around the world and try to make an imprint. He wants to be the peacemaker. He sees a great opportunity here. While he's aggressive, he doesn't want to be a warrior. He wants to have the capacity to fight if he has to. But much like Reagan, he really wants to find ways to get you to do what he wants without war. And I think that he will move on Ukraine. He may encourage the Israelis to take out the Iranian dictatorship because there's no long-term solution as long as the Ayatollahs are in charge. But I think everywhere else he's going to try to find a way to get to peace, and I think that's a significant opportunities in the world. We're also faced, by the way, with a real decay in Cuba, where the electric generating system is collapsing because it's a Soviet-era system with no parts. And they literally are going to have blackouts constantly. And there's now maybe an opportunity in Venezuela where the economy is really beginning to crumble under the collapse of the oil industry. So he may have a very interesting period of being on offense. I personally believe, and this is a sign of my youth with Ronald Reagan when I was a junior congressman, the number one, number two, and number three things they've got to get done to have a chance to win in 26 and 28 is passing a really large tax cut and regulatory reform bill. I mean, I think that, and that means, in my judgment, that for the first 3 or 4 months of the year, every cabinet officer, this is what Baker did for Reagan when he told the cabinet, all of you will make speeches on the tax cut. None of you will bring in any ideas beyond the tax cut until we pass the tax cut. And as you may remember, although you were a bit young at that stage, but we had, I think we got about 1/3 of the Democratic vote for the Reagan tax cuts because they couldn't go back home and vote no. And I think they have to design some kind of campaign that reaches the average American and convinces them that they have to pressure the Congress to do what Trump wants on taxes and economic growth. If they can pull that off, and if they have a booming economy in 26, then I think you could have an FDR kind of realignment. But if they can't pull that off, then I think this could be a blip, and you could see us gradually, slide back towards some kind of traditional establishment in 24, and 26, and 28.
All right, so that's the policy. I think you're right. I mean, he's got to deal with the taxes. They're expiring. They're his tax cuts from his first term. So he's got to deal with them. The regulatory stuff, 100%. The immigration stuff, 100%. Let's talk about like retribution, though. There's a lot of talk among Trump and Trump allies about going after people that wrong them. Particularly, you mentioned General Milley, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Some have suggested that he be court-martialed. You are no stranger to the defense world, national security. What would you advise him to do with respect to somebody like General Milley and some of these other officers that he believes should be recalled?
Well, look, I mean, I would focus in 3 places: the Justice Department, the January 6th committee, and the Defense Department. And I would, in all 3 cases, start with a commission of inquiry. I mean, who was so totally screwed up in Afghanistan? What exactly was going on? I mean, what Milley did in calling the Chinese defense minister was very close to treason. I mean, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs doesn't have the authority under our Constitution to directly undermine the commander-in-chief. And frankly, some of the things Milley did were beyond the pale. We should know who screwed up Afghanistan. I mean, that withdrawal was humiliating, and it was a display of weakness. And I think it was a significant factor in the thinking by the Russians and others about how much they could be on offense. Well, somebody ought to be held accountable. Nobody's been held accountable. We've become a country where nobody learns in your school, so we pay you anyway. You can't do anything militarily, so we salute you. You go down the list. There are no consequences in America today for government failure, except that they get a pension and they get a nice party and they get to go home.
So let's take a case like Hunter Biden. Do you pardon him, or do you say, "Hey, sorry, dude, your justice system made their rendering. You're on your own"? I mean, some people are suggesting that that's a great way to tip their hat at Biden, to make bygones be bygones, to repair relationships. But Hunter Biden was offered a sweetheart deal and turned it down. So to some extent, I mean, he had his chance.
Well, I mean, I can imagine a circumstance where Trump decides he's going to pardon virtually everybody in the J6 proceedings, and in the process drops in Hunter's name and says, okay, I'm a generous guy. I'm concerned on a bipartisan basis. Now, how many of you Democrats want to raise Cain about this? I can imagine that. I wouldn't particularly be for pardoning him by himself, but at the same time, if he wasn't the president's son, he's a pathetic figure. I mean, the pictures of him laying in bed, with cocaine and all that stuff. This guy's just sort of a tragic human being. And right. I don't know the way I'm much more upset about Jack Smith, who had been reprimanded 9-0 by the Supreme Court for trying to destroy a Republican governor, and spent several years, and I saw a number this morning estimating $90 million trying to destroy Trump. I certainly think we should know about that. We should know everything about the relationship between Atlanta and New York and the White House on going after Trump. But that's why I start with the idea, let's first have a commission of inquiry, get all the facts out in the open, And then based on what we learn from the facts, let's look at what should be done.
So there's a lot of rumors about who we might install in different positions. Do you think that sends shockwaves through DOJ? I mean, like you got Pete Hegseth at DOD, you got Pam Bondi now at AG, and we're talking about some potential new nominees for FBI. If you're the Washington establishment, are you worried about what's coming down the pike?
Yeah, I think if you aren't already in a state of shock over the election, you will be in a state of shock over the nominations, but they should be. I mean, these are insider. But look at the news media and the degree to which it cooperated in a totally dishonest Russia hoax. It cooperated in a totally dishonest cover-up of the Hunter Biden laptop. I mean, every time you turn around, the elite media has been guilty of betraying its trust to the American people and its trust to the American system, and has sold out for ideological warfare. I think they should be embarrassed and they should be worried. And I think you have to send in tough people. You have to send in people who understand going in that most of the people who work for you voted for the other team. Pompeo once said to me that they'd figured out late in his secretaryship that the State Department was like Fort Apache, the Bronx. There were about 25 people on Pompeo's side, and then lots and lots of people trying to destroy what they were doing. And I think part of the goal of this administration has to be to break up that kind of incestuous left-wing establishmentarian thinking.
Mr. Speaker, last question. The House is now on a razor's edge majority-wise. He's got 3 members at least going to his administration. Just put your head in Speaker Johnson's place for a second. What does he have to say to keep the troops together, to keep them from fracturing as they deal with these policy initiatives down that they may not be 100% on board?
Well, I think first of all, he's got to be very careful, which he has been. I'm very impressed with the job that he's doing. I could not have done it. It requires a level of patience at listening to every single person, no matter how idiotic, and just cheerfully listening, hour after hour of listening. I think that he has to figure out what are the boundaries of what's possible, even with Trump's support, because Trump will learn fairly quickly that both in the House and the Senate, you have independently elected people. I mean, when I was at my peak, which was I was a relatively strong speaker, yes. I still had guys who come up to me, for personal friends of mine, who'd come up to me and say, "Gosh, I just can't be with you today." And I'd say to them, "I really need you." And they say, "I know, but I can't do it." And though both President Trump and Vice President Vance and Speaker Johnson will learn that they have better figure out how to get some Democrats, which again was part of the Reagan genius, is that. And part of what we did, when we passed welfare reform, because we had won with the American people, we split the Democrats evenly. It was 101 yes, 101 no on welfare reform, which for many Democrats had been, a very big heartburn issue. So I think they've got to listen to the American people, rally the American people, and drop everything into 2 groups. Easy to do, fine, just get it done. Really hard to do, then it has to be a 30, 60, 90-day campaign. You have to arouse the grassroots. They have to bring pressure to bear, and the members have to have no choice. Those are the 2 categories you're going to operate in.
I love it. Anyway, that's great advice. I hope he listens. We'll send it to him. Speaker Gingrich, always glad to have you on the show. It was great seeing you and Ambassador Gingrich down at Mar-a-Lago.
Good to see you.
You bet.
Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.